Hey guys, it's me, EODGamer here, and let's talk about two extremely strong DPSs in version 2.5 beyond some of us think that Acheron's rerun is around the corner. If you are a person trying to decide, is Acheron or Feixiao a better investment for your overall count, then this video is the right one for you. As always with these better investment videos, I promise you I'll be super unbiased, just logical, choosing between both of them all the way. If you want to care about my personal bias, my own thoughts, you can go right to the end. I'll share with you it right there as well. So first things first, we always like to talk about what these two characters can do for us right now, regardless of wherever it is. Because if we are spending hard-earned Stellar Jades, we want to know how can we benefit from them directly, right? If they are much better in future because they are waiting for other characters to come in, maybe it's better to just pull their reruns and stuff like that. But of course, let's get into it. Between the two of them, let's start off with an overall arcing note. If you are a new player, you don't have either of them. If I were to give one sentence to describe them, both of them extremely strong, of course. We already know they are going to be very, very strong. And I think they are going to be very competitive. The difference between Feixiao and Acheron is Feixiao is very, very flexible in terms of what team compositions she feels, whereas Acheron is a little bit more niche in terms of focusing down in a certain teams. If you are talking about team distribution, which is what we have over here, if you haven't seen our 8 teams of Honkai Star Rail, I highly recommend you check the video out. But basically, what this methodology that we have here is there are 8 main styles that Honkai Star Rail tends to rotate around the meta, the memory of chaos, buffs, debuffs, and etc. Usually plays in one of these 8 teams. I have Feixiao as well as Acheron here. I apologize for any of you who are colorblind, blind, not to worry. I can always explain it as we go along too. So Feixiao here in green box, she falls in the follow-up and fast and often team category. These two teams are very, very apparent, especially follow-up. It's like super meta. So Feixiao is playing directly into current meta teams and also creating and bringing in characters of the past who weren't really good in this category a little bit more into this zone. If you want to know her best teams, you can check out the video that we have on the channel that is coming right up as well. Very, very strong character, very versatile as well. Acheron, on the other hand, here in purple, is mainly playing into the debuff-oriented teams as well as hyper carry. I put hyper carry as both of them, so it's a yellow background here, because both of them can be played into hyper carry. This clearly shows one over the other. Feixiao is a character that is way more easier to play, way more easier to build, has way more team compositions, and can work with many, many team characters. Acheron, on the other hand, is a little bit restrictive because of her requirement to play in a 2 nihility team if you have her at E0. So that is the key distinction between both of them. Feixiao, much more flexible, Acheron a bit more restrictive. If you talk about the team compositions that work well for them, Feixiao plays into so many team compositions. We have a full video on that, all the different ones, but in a short summary, any character that has follow-up attacking ability in their kit or acts very, very often, moves very, very quickly as well, benefit this character, and there are so many in the game. Characters of the past, for example, like Esther, Hanya, these characters who focus mainly on movement speed, helping characters move faster, they are brought back into the game, which they were super out of meta, and these two are solid characters. Of course, Robin, but these are all limited characters. It doesn't help make the point across. I just want to say she broadens the current game state, very interesting in a bit of a changing meta way. Acheron, on the other hand, we are already used to knowing what is her downside, so to speak. You do need a lot of characters that debuff in the team. You need nihility characters. So if you are not playing, for example, Jiao Qiu, Pella, you're not playing other nihility characters in the team, you either have her at E2 or you're not making the full use of her potential. She wants to be played with nihility characters and is quite restrictive for a new player, triple nihility characters being built on their one account. It's very, very zoomed in on one. Feixiao, on the other hand, is much more easier to build because the supports that work well with her can easily be rotated around to other characters. Very easy to get into as well. So I think that is the key distinction between both of them in terms of the team compositions they play into and the meta that they fight into. I have to do a logical winner. In my opinion, if you are a very new player into the game, you do not have too many characters. Feixiao works well with way more free-to-play characters compared to a character like Acheron. Acheron is very specific, wants nihility to outperform. If you are a super new player, deciding the two of them, Feixiao is actually a top pick. For me, I think she is probably a must pull if you're a new player into the game. You just started. Definitely Feixiao is more attractive than Acheron. Some of you who are waiting, thinking of Acheron's pool, in terms of current value, I think Feixiao offers new player a lot more. The question then becomes, if you aren't really a new player, you're a slightly longer term player, but for some reason you just didn't pick Acheron up, is it worth it to spend your premium resources on Feixiao versus the likes of Acheron? Now that comes the next question, which I want to talk about, which is really talking about alternatives. What are the alternatives to these two characters? Because how to determine value is of course knowing what they do, how they perform in the current game state, whether they broaden or very niche, team compositions and stuff. But more important than that is we want to know if this exact character, another character does exactly the same thing. We can bypass them with alternatives, we can get by, then there's no point pulling these units, right? And in this section, let's talk about alternatives. The easier of the two to talk about, of course, will be a character like Feixiao, who is the new character into the game, Win Hunt character. She does insane amounts of weakness efficiency breaking on the enemy. From what I've tested so far, half bar gone on the enemy if you are not even resistant to win on a slightly elite mob. That is ridiculous amount of break when she bursts on the enemy. Super strong as well. We will of course have the videos out on the channel once we do the editing and stuff, but we are of course testing her out as we speak right now as well. But Feixiao, super strong. Weakness breaking is very good. What are the other win weakness breakers in the game? And she doesn't only target win weakness, she can hit colorless similar to Acheron, and she can even half bar the weakness break efficiency on elite mobs that are not weak to win. That is crazy amount of weakness break. Acheron on the other hand doesn't do as much colorless break. She does maybe 20% thereabouts if she full outs, or 30%, not as significant as a character like Feixiao. Win weakness breakers. If we are talking about weakness breaking efficiency for win element, let's see who they are. We have a character like Blade, who is not the best at, he's better in AoE in a sense, he can respond, but definitely Feixiao offers a lot more. He can tackle both big bosses, can target elite monsters, does massive amounts of damage. We have characters like Sampo, we have characters even on the banner right now, Black Swan as well that's coming up. These are all the win weakness breakers, and maybe to some extent Dan Heng based, the win Dan Heng. Out of all these 4 characters currently in the game, we don't count Ho Ho and we don't count Win Bronir as well because they don't do exactly a lot of win weakness breaking. The 4 of these characters, my take is the best character is probably Sampo at specifically win weakness breaking. Black Swan, not too fantastic. Blade, a bit conditional, depends on how many times he gets hit, whether he loses a lot of life. Dan Heng is probably not too bad also, but he has been way out of play. He's not even in the meta nowadays anymore. So very few competition in terms of element, and if you're looking for someone to carry you in the win element, you realize that I have no investment in win so far. Every time there's a win weakness enemy, I struggle against that. Feixiao solves that problem very well. Any heavy mobs smashes it down very quickly. On the other hand, a character like Acheron. Acheron, if you change to the flip side, if you're talking about specifically lightning weakness, you're trying to tackle lightning content, you do have quite a number of options to specifically target lightning. You have characters like Kafka, you can play Kafka. You have cheaper alternatives like Serval to tackle lightning-based content if you just want to break. You have characters like Jingyuan, who also do damage against lightning weakness enemies. You have a few more options in the lightning category versus, of course, the wind category. And all these 3 units are very decent at breaking wind weakness, lightning weakness already. What Acheron does better is, of course, she does massive amounts of damage. But if you're specifically looking to tackle elemental content, lightning is not a category that is very scarce and very rare, so that is something that is very important to know as well. You have quite a bit of options in terms of alternatives for the lightning category between these 2 of them. Where I think both of them truly shines is in the alternatives category. If we take a step back, rather than just focusing on who competes with these units, that's important as well. The bigger step that I think is more important is because if we want to talk about who competes with these 2 units, every single of the DPS will be competitive. They will be competing in some way if you talk about elements aside. The more important thing to talk about is who competes for similar supports as these 2 characters. Because if everyone's using Runmei, everyone's using the exact same character, it's going to be a big problem when your one character needs to be played everywhere. You don't have double of that unit. The true benefit, I think, in terms of alternatives for Acheron is the alternatives in the roster available to support her. The difference between Feixiao and Acheron is, while Feixiao is much more generalistic, as we talked about in the first section already, can fit into a lot more teams, the benefit that Acheron has is she generally uses supports that no other meta team would want to use. Let me give you an example. Characters like Jiao Qiu. No other meta team, follow up, break, whatever not, use this particular unit. He's mainly outperforming in characters for teams like Acheron teams or DOT teams, both of which a character like Feixiao doesn't care too much about. Other units that she outperforms in Acheron. You can play, for example, the likes of Pella, you can play for the likes of Well, all these kind of units, they are kind of like play into many team compositions, but you can also play like Kafka, DOT, Acheron and stuff. You have very, very many Nihility characters who are not too attractive outside of Acheron teams in this very instance. The only exception maybe being Jingliu teams for Pella, Doctor Ratio teams for the debuffs, and other than that, maybe that's probably about it in the meta game state right now, and maybe like DOT teams. Only exceptions. Whereas Feixiao, the characters that work really well with her, just to name a few, if you want to go into the full list of combinations, there's many units that work well with her. Check out the team's video if you're interested in Feixiao specifically, but characters like Robin, super strong for her. Characters, for example, like Topaz and Nambi, super strong for her. These units are a little bit more popular than these units on the left over here with work well with Acheron. A lot of characters actually can use these units and they are super versatile. Most DPS you have in the game probably want to play with these two. If you have Doctor Ratio who's free, you're likely competing in the same spot as well to play with these two units. Other supports that work really well with them, of course, you have universal ones that work well with both, like Aventurine is okay with both, and etc, etc. But generally speaking, harmony units want to be played with a character like Feixiao a little bit more compared to Acheron, especially if you do not have Acheron at E2, just because of the restrictive nature of Acheron's team compositions. So I think that's the bigger picture to decide between alternatives. So yes, while I may say that Feixiao wins in terms of not having too many people competing with her in the win element, but at the end of the day, the supports that she fights with tend to be a little bit more, but she is one of the best DPS that is now that utilize these popular supports. Who do I give it to a win? I would say that if you have very little, if you're a new player again, Feixiao wins, she has lesser alternatives. But if you're a player who already has been around for a while, you already have established follow-up team compositions, you already have a good team build, I think Acheron definitely has much fewer alternatives in terms of utilizing the current supports. So I would say this alternatives category is a bit of a tie between both of them, honest opinion, at least comparing both of them. Now, looking at the present, it's important to see the current game state. Both of these units, excellent unit, really, really strong. The more important thing that I think is very, very interesting and what you guys are very interested in as well is the future value of these two units. Now, the pressing thing around the community right now is, the truth is, Acheron has been out for almost 6 months now, and Feixiao is the new character. We can see a little bit of a baton pass. Maybe Hunt is coming more in the game. Even if you don't care about her Hunt characteristics, she is very, very strong still. Does massive amounts of damage that Feixiao can bring. Future value of these characters, the word that we want to talk about is the word power creep. Between the two of them, Acheron still impresses me. Like, her damage is nothing small by any means, but Feixiao offers so much more versatility that I think that she would likely last for a bit longer period of time and requires a lot less investment to get that versatility going. Acheron really pops off if you have a E2, you have a signature, she really becomes ridiculously versatile and like super, super strong. But for most of us in the game, you have like 4 new characters with the triple banner system that they just introduced, so many banners to pull from. More often than not, a free-to-play player would rather have 2 nice DPS at E0 S1 than 1 DPS at E2 S1, especially if you're a very, very mild player. You want to play more styles in the game. I think that will become more attractive. Of course, this is talking about horizontal, whether you want many characters, or vertical, many Eidolons and their signature. If you're interested in the theories behind which is a better playstyle, we have a video there on the channel already. It's called Horizontal versus Vertical Playstyles. You can check it out if you're interested as well. But anyways, for future value, I think a character like Acheron, once she comes back for her first rerun, and most people like start pulling her E2, the devs will start to think moving forward already, yes, everyone already is sold on Acheron, everyone has a very strong lightning DPS. We need more people to like continue pulling on the meta. DPS characters tend to be power creep very easily. They want to like slowly introduce more DPS. Even if you don't power creep Acheron completely, you will try to like rotate her out of the meta at least once or twice. Maybe the enemies have super high effect rest so that they are forced to not play debuffers, you can't play debuffers, then in that case you want to rotate to a mod hunt meta as well. So some things that can change. Acheron is playing into teams of the old existing meta, and if you talk about monetizing, it makes no sense to just keep pushing Acheron, everyone has her, then her banner like sells 0, no one pulls on it. It's not a smart marketing move. Instead, releasing new DPS, stronger DPS, more versatile DPS, likely I think is the way that Hoyoverse would take it from now on. So between the two of them, future value, 6 months from now, am I more confident, or logically speaking, Acheron is going to be as relevant, or is Feixiao still going to be relevant? for the sake that Feixiao is colorless breaking, very, very strong, fits into many different teams, whereas Acheron is a little bit more niche until you have an E2. The restrictive nature of Acheron just makes it feel much more easier to push her aside in terms of the things that they can do. I can think of like so many ways, and let me know in the comments below if you can just play the devil's advocate here. How can you make Acheron irrelevant? I think it's quite easy. It's just enemies don't get debuffed. They have super high effect rest. I think that's a very interesting way of seeing things too. Characters, for example, like Feixiao, probably is going to remain relevant at least 6 months for now, especially when they still have to sell their first rerun banner. Usually they last like relevant until their first rerun. So I think that's my thoughts on the future value category. If you talk about stylistic, so power creep aside, let's shift that power creep section. We of course have many videos discussing it already, but the bigger question is, are we going into a style change? As we know currently in the game, we have been dominated by break, follow up, and debuff in terms of the 8-team style. If Hoyoverse wants to continue monetizing, they need to shift to other team compositions, be it rotating to counter styles in follow-up attacking team compositions with like Yunli, counter characters like Blade, Clara and stuff, or perhaps even expanding into a new category of fast and often teams where characters move very fast and get benefit and value for keep moving very fast, or perhaps even DOT teams. If we are shifting out of the meta, the one that hedges slightly better is the person that can be played into a team composition here that is currently not flavor of month, which is the fast and often teams, the teams that just keep attacking, focusing a lot on speed as well. So I think in terms of future value, I have to give it to Feixiao logically, and if I would honestly recommend. Doesn't mean these are two lousy units. I think both of them will be still strong, just that one has clear risk factors, and I always like to give you logical and safe decision making as well. Next up, potential. Now, instead of looking at the overall game state, the meta, who is better, who does more damage, who is versatile in team compositions, we turn and look at Hoyoverse as a company instead in this category. So what are some things I always like to look at after playing like Hoyoverse games for 4 years now and plus? They always like to sell characters. Their first rerun is very important because they still have to be relevant for at least their first rerun banner. So you know, between the two of them, if Acheron is coming back soon, and now she's still relevant, is because you are in this loop. After the first rerun, when they sell you, they're like, so you're E2 already. Now we probably are going to bring her back only 1 year later. So we can just monetize you, and then we'll make her slightly irrelevant or force a bit more restrictive team compositions, or put her in a situation that you need to actually have an E2 to be functional. So many different ways that can stress players out to force that second rerun later on. But a character like Feixiao, who works insanely good already at E0 in my opinion, testing her out with E0 just like cruising in the Stellar Sea. We have a video that's going to come out of course on the channel anytime shortly in future. But Feixiao I think is very attractive in terms of the potential she can provide. Super good. And she plays into the first red banner rerun cycle, likely going to remain relevant. 6 months, on average characters take like 5 to 6 months, unless you're Robin of course, that like she basically advanced herself forward, so her banner came the fastest ever in history. No idea why they put her out so fast, but most characters tend to take like 6 months to see their first rerun, so we have some time to save for their rerun as well as playing into it. These two characters work very well in their current game state, and their future also looks decent. Of course, one slightly more optimistic than the other, who is playing into a bit of headwinds in terms of a trend. Other than that, potential section of course talks about other things like lore, story. We have a general of the Sento arc and versus like Acheron, who is of course one of the Nihility Emanators. Story spoiler, apologies. But they don't play into too many thematic themes that are being pulled up. For example, you have characters like maybe of these kind of IPC factions like Topaz and Nambi. Why is she over here? And you have characters like Aventurine, who's IPC. These kind of characters have story headwinds, whereas these two are a bit more neutral in this aspect. Probably don't have any like faction bonuses to push them up in the near future. So I would say for lore, story, incentive wise for Hoyoverse to keep these characters relevant, I'll say it's like more or less a draw. But because of the first banner issue and how they always will keep characters at least relevant till their first rerun, most of the time for the past 4 years that I've played, I would say Feixiao wins in this category over here. The new DPS is always just slightly more favored. The question is, will Acheron become like Jingliu, who fell out very quickly, or will she last at least a little bit longer in terms of depth? For example, a character like Imbibitor Lune for the benefit because enemies are still a lot weak to imaginary because of Aventurine's presence. They are trying to sell characters like Aventurine and stuff like that. So it really boils down to luck. I think that Acheron will still be okay, she'll still be relevant, but Feixiao, you can tell she is going to be the one that is very, very strong. And last category before I go on with my own personal opinions is the free-to-play kit over here. Who functions better? And we're talking about, it's very different from spending $1,000 on these two characters versus getting them at their base copy. Which one outperforms? My personal honest recommendation, I don't even need to think about this during decision making. Feixiao is way cheaper, way more efficient, and way more effective to build as a free-to-play player, a person who's only going for their base copy without their signature. If you're talking about E2 investment and higher, I think Acheron outperforms slightly because she removes the key downside that she has. But E2 is 3 characters, mind you. That is very expensive, and she doesn't really have too many good 4-star light cones that you can use, whereas Feixiao is perfectly fine using the free-to-play cruising in the Cellar Sea as well, which gives her most of what she will require, like crit and stuff. Acheron, you still need to consider getting that signature. So cheaper to build, investment-wise, Feixiao is way cheaper, Acheron a little bit more pricey, and that leads me to rate, I think, Feixiao a huge win in this category in terms of free-to-play kit. Most people, if you are at E2 already, you probably would feel that Acheron is already pretty good. And then Acheron in that case, at higher investment, I feel that Acheron probably outperforms a bit more because she does good amounts of damage, especially if she has the flexibility of E2 too. That's my honest opinion between free-to-play kit. And last but not least, of course, now I'm talking to you now honestly here, best recommendations for better investment value for these two. It's very clear that holdovers always goes in a cycle. You sell the flashy DPS tend to get a bit more power crap quicker than others. Some might have residual value over time, but if you have a strong DPS that lasts forever in the game, then the game's not going to make any money and we will soon go into end of service. If Acheron can last 10 years, right? One side is always checked. She is a very strong DPS, but because of the fundamental headwinds of a gacha game, I would say that Acheron is much more heavier subjected to power creep. It makes more sense if the holdovers is tending towards a rotation of game style, and my recommendation would probably be a character like Feixiao. I think Feixiao outperforms tremendously in a better investment sense. She's a very strong DPS. We'll have tons of videos coming out as well, even at team compositions. You will see her true value shortly on the channel. But if you found this video helpful, you found it insightful as well, do give me a like, subscribe, and share with any of your friends who are deciding, maybe they're on the fence, which one should they pull for. Anyways guys, thank you again so much for watching, your attention, and see you in the next video.